Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of IX Open Access. I'm Rob Hazan, Senior Director of Product at Index Exchange. Thanks so much for joining our final webinar of a two-part series. Last week, we sat down with the trade desk and Essence to discuss the impact of fraud on buyers and sellers and the critical need to secure the OTT supply chain. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by industry leaders from the IAB Tech Lab, Oracle, and Publica to discuss how we can support the growth and maturity of the programmatic OTT marketplace with technology and improved standards. I'm really excited about this conversation in particular, as it'll highlight some of the important work these folks have been doing to introduce standards that our industry can use to secure the supply chain for OTT and possibly other interesting use cases in the future as well. Supply chain transparency and security is something that we're really passionate about at Index Exchange. We feel that it's critical to provide a safe marketplace for sellers and buyers, protecting them against non-human and otherwise invalid traffic. This has been a hallmark of ours in web for many years, and we're excited to bring the same philosophy to programmatic OTT so that it can deliver on its promises of ease, scale, and efficiency. There's a lot to discuss, and it can be a complicated topic. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, IAB Tech Lab's VP of Programmatic Products and Partnerships, Amit Shetty. Amit, please take it away.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you Index Exchange for hosting this conversation. Like Rob said, I'm Amit Shetty from the IAB Tech Lab, and I lead our programmatic efforts, including anti-fraud, brand safety, and transparency efforts in general. This topic has become really near and dear to my heart over the last 2 years, and it has also risen in importance among our members in this time. There's transparency in general, and in particular, ad fraud, along with brand safety, is one of our 3 top priorities for 2021, the other 2 being privacy and measurement, as you can imagine. So I'm very excited to be here and have this conversation. But before we dive in, let's continue with the introductions. We have a great panel today. You've all met Rob already. Next, we have Janelle from Oracle. Do you want to introduce yourself and talk about your role at Oracle, Janelle?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Janelle De Rivera. I'm the Director of Product Management for Oracle Moat. And Moat is a measurement and marketing analytics suite designed to help advertisers, publishers, and platforms measure media performance across their digital and TV advertising campaigns.
Great. And last but not least, we have Ben from Publica. Ben?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on. Excited to have this conversation today. My name is Ben Antier. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Publica. Publica is a connected TV ad server. And so what we do is we obsess about 2 things, maximizing revenue for the publishers that we work with and delivering a TV level user experience. To do that, we've built a number of solutions ranging from SSAI, which we're going to talk about a lot today, to the unified auction, but also all of the features that are necessary to run a modern streaming service, ad-supported streaming service, of course. So things like audience management, campaign management, and we do a lot of things around ad pod optimizations to make sure that we're delivering non-duplicate, non-competitive ads, and that the experience for both the viewer and the advertiser is the best that it can be on a connected TV.
All right, thank you, Ben. Let's start off with the need for securing the OTT supply chain, right? So how does OTT ad fraud, or in particular CTV ad fraud, actually work? And all 3 of you can chime in for every question, actually. But Janelle, I know that the folks at Oracle had a recent news story around CTV ad fraud, so maybe let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So connected TV advertising, where the content is delivered on the large screen television set, it's definitely a premium, and spending is between 5 to 15 times more expensive than traditional display advertising, which of course makes it significantly more attractive to fraud. Fraudsters will always follow where the money goes. So in the CTV space, what we've seen is that fraudsters can misrepresent lower priced inventory, such as desktop and mobile, as CTV and then pocket the difference. There have been CTV fraud operations where mobile apps impersonate or spoof CTV apps. Another factor that makes CTV vulnerable to exploits is that measurement is still less mature in the CTV space. In the CTV environment, ads are served via server-side ad insertion or SSAI technology, where the ads are stitched directly into the content stream. And in many cases, the SSAI server will send the measurement beacon to the measurement server directly. So over the last year, there were 2 large CTV ad fraud operations that took advantage of the limited transparency in the CTV ad serving technology and tricked advertisers into paying for ads that were never delivered to any actual users. The fraud schemes were referred to as Ice Bucket and Stream Scam, and both of these used a technique known as SSAI spoofing, where fraudsters send ad requests from data centers for spoofed or faked devices. So from a buyer's perspective, these fraudulent operations make it look like the ad request is coming from a valid SSAI server. And in the case of Stream Scam, the spoofing SSAI server requested ads from an ad server and then fired off measurement events to the measurement server. And in reality, there was no content, there were no CTV devices, and there were no viewers. So with Stream Scam, it was really forging 3 primary fields where household IP addresses were written in with known household IPs. User agents were written in with any user agent it wanted as it fired the measurement pixels. And app IDs were written in app IDs as it made the ad requests. And when we first saw Stream Scam, it actually started out pretty small and began to diversify its behavior. So it grew pretty rapidly. And to give you an idea of the scale of this fraud scheme, the operation spoofed more than 28.8 million US households, including over 3,000 apps and over 3,000 CTV device models. So basically affecting every major CTV device. And the scheme resulted in what we estimate $14.5 million in stolen revenue. So we can see from these 2 spoofing ad frauds from the last year, there is definitely a threat and an impact in the CTV space, and fraudsters will always come up with sophisticated ways to take advantage of new technology gaps.
I think some of these stories are fascinating and interesting, and they point out some of the incentives that exist for these bad actors, right? And so I think one of the schemes that we see is, as you mentioned, is sort of this arbitrage scheme where you buy cheap mobile supply, pass it off as high quality CTV supply, and like you said, you sort of pocket the difference. The other one that I think is a common model is traffic acquisition, right? Where a publisher either knowingly or unwittingly, contracts with someone who says, "Hey, we can bring you large new audiences for this, for your new Roku channel or whatever it is," right? And basically they're not real audiences. They're bots. They're non-human traffic. That's another really common scheme that we've seen. And I think pointing back to Amit's question about why is it important to secure the OTT supply chain, I think hopefully it's relatively obvious at this point to the viewers that all this invalid traffic harms our industry tremendously, and it results in things like buyers not being comfortable on the open market and feeling like they're relegated to carefully selected one-to-one PMP deals. And that doesn't allow us to deliver on the promise of programmatic with respect to scale and ease and efficiency. And that's why it's worth solving these issues.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think, the reason why connected TV is so exciting right now is because viewers have shifted to this new medium faster than advertising dollars. And I think a big reason for that is what we're talking about today, is there's a lack of credibility in this space. That's the real issue here. And that's why, we're working, all of our companies are working so hard on addressing it, because we know that, first of all, we can fix this problem. And when we do, it's going to give more comfort for buyers to spend on this medium. So it's really up for, us to find the solutions, and to it's going to benefit everybody when we do.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd like to add to that, that I've heard from other folks as well, is that even though it is easy to, it can be easy to brush things off, saying that, hey, it's right now CTV is all direct sold, and so fraud can be managed. That really is not entirely true. To the points that y'all are making, it is important to give the buyers confidence that they are buying, clear inventory, and in order to really scale, we will want to get to open programmatic selling at some point as well. Actually, and to the other point that was raised, SSAI seems to make things a little more tricky in terms of ad fraud here. So, Ben, what on earth is SSAI? Why do we need this? Sounds like we should just get rid of SSAI and we'll be all set, right?
No. Sure, I'm happy to speak about what is SSAI, why is it a target of fraud. So first, we could spend hours talking about it, but to put it simply, an SSAI server, its role is to deliver a single stream of content plus ads to a device, right? So the reason why we have this complicated four-letter term is to differentiate it from client-side ad insertion, right? So historically, ads were delivered what we call client-side, so meaning that the browser is involved, usually running some type of JavaScript to deliver an ad, which creates all sorts of latencies. I mean, we've all seen, the spinning wheels on the web. There, client-side ad insertion is not an optimal way to do things, right? Which is why, especially when you're in a very fragmented ecosystem like CTV, where there's many different devices, these TVs built to run, there's no JavaScript on your Samsung TV that runs. So that's why publishers have turned to SSAI. The player calls a single server, the server delivers just packages of videos, which can be content or ads, and that's what the player needs to worry about. Everything else moves to the server side, the ad request, but also the beacons firing, right? So now to hone in on why are fraudsters targeting SSAI. So the SSAI server is delivering this stream of content plus ads, right? When you hit an ad break, when an ad is delivered, the SSAI server is also responsible for firing all of the appropriate trackers, all the billing notifications. As I'm sure everybody here knows, our industry revolves around impression trackers, right? That's how everybody gets paid. If you're able, as a frauder, to spoof that and to start firing billing notifications to anybody the way you want, that now you've created a massive opportunity for fraud, which is exactly what's been happening, right? Now, having said that, I think it's really important that we don't, pack our bags and run back the other way towards client-side ad insert. First of all, because it's not an option. We cannot do what we need to do if we were to have to build SDKs for every single TV implemented. I mean, we would waste years of time, and SSAI has allowed us to leapfrog, and that's why we see programmatic TV today, is because we are in this world of server-to-server communications. So I actually think it's a blessing that we're in this situation, because guess what? Many industries have figured out how to secure server-to-server transactions. Hey, in ad tech, we get a lot of things right. We do some things we do are very innovative. Sometimes we're a bit late. I think on this front, we're very late. If you look at a bank, when you set up a wire transfer, you don't have JavaScript running on your friend's bank account, to see if they can receive the account. No, it's a secure transaction between two servers, right? And that's what we're building here with the IAB, with Index, with Oracle, is we're building the protocols to secure these server-to-server transactions, because once these protocols are in place, it's much harder to spoof a secure server-to-server connection than to run some type of JavaScript code on a page. So I think it's actually going to help our industry become more secure, and that's why we're very excited about all the work that we've been doing.
I think Ben nailed it, unsurprisingly, because he's an expert in this space. But there's not a ton to add. I'd say ultimately, the main point that I take away from having some of these conversations with Ben in the past is, you look at any other industry that deals with valuable financial instruments, and there's a lot of security and rigor that goes around it. And I think our industry has gone on for too long without. And so now, you can imagine that, like, you wouldn't want to do online banking if there was a 25% chance that every time you did a transfer, it vanished into the ether, right? And so now is an opportunity for us to bring that same type of rigor to this industry. And again, I think everyone benefits from end users to buyers to sellers and everyone in between from having a trustworthy marketplace. So no question. And we never should go back to client-side ad insertion. Server-side ad insertion is way better. I never want to see my content stream buffering again. So I'm with Ben on that one too.
Yeah, and as a measurement provider on the Moat side, we've been focusing on establishing relationships with SSAI providers for the clients that we're working with, but they're point solutions, and every measurement vendor is coming up with these very specific solutions that are limited to just their offering. So there's definitely the need to get to industry standards that are implemented.
Which is a great segue to the next question I was going to ask, which is around solutions. And I do want to, I suspect that we will spend a lot of time focusing on some of the Tech Lab, IAB Tech Lab related standards, but I do want to talk about solutions in general beyond standards as well. But let's start off with the Tech Lab part of things. And maybe Rob, you can kick us off with some of the things that we've been working on in the various working groups.
Yeah, so there are a number of standards that already exist and some new ones that we're all working on introducing to address some of these problems of trust and transparency that exist in the OTT space and also beyond. So a lot of these issues are transferable to the mobile app space, the web space even. So hopefully the work that we're all putting in and the investments that we're all putting in to improve transparency and security of this supply chain have splash over benefits to the other the other channels that matter to us all. So just to touch on a couple of examples. So VAST 4.0, which is a standard around communication for video creatives. One of the recommendations that it makes is that for server-side transactions, that the parties use HTTP headers in order to send the user agent of the actual end user device and the IP address of the end user device, rather than sending the user agent or the IP address of the server that's originating the communication. So, for example, if you have Publica that's sending a bid request to Index Exchange, you wouldn't want them to give, or we wouldn't want them to give us the IP address of their server or the user agent of their server. We'd want them to tell us information about the end user's device, which is a signal that's very helpful generally in identifying the device and looking for patterns of anomalous behavior that we might look at and say, hey, something seems wrong here, et cetera. So for transparency in terms of the device itself and helping to identify the device, VAST 4.0 makes some recommendations around how to do that. Then running on the device, you have an app, right? And in the case of OTT, of streaming video content, maybe that's your favorite streaming video app, Hulu or wherever you like to watch your content, Peacock, et cetera. So the IAB has introduced a number of guidelines around how OTT or CTV apps should identify themselves. And so there's a standard around store assigned app identification that allows parties to communicate about these streaming video apps and use the same set of identifiers so that, again, you have transparency into the app itself that the user is using. Whereas today we have actually somewhat of a fragmented field where folks are using all sorts of different standards to name their app bundles. And this creates confusion and doesn't allow people to properly identify the app. A third standard that I would point to, set of standards actually, is CTV app ads.txt, as well as sellers.json and supply chain object in OpenRTB. These are three different standards or protocols that are used to properly identify the seller. So, and seller takes on a lot of forms in CTV, given some of the carriage and redistribution arrangements that exist. And so that means both the content producer as well as any licensed carrier of their content who may have the ability to monetize some of it. So you can think of like a vMVPD, for example, that's able to monetize some of the ad positions from content that they are retransmitting. So these standards, sellers.json, creating transparency into who is allowed to sell inventory on behalf of a particular publisher or content producer, and again, the supply chain object. These things all exist to allow the entire supply chain to identify the seller. So these are 3 examples of standards to identify the device, identify the app, and identify the seller that are critical to creating transparency. The problem that we run into is that these things in a server-to-server transaction are relatively easily spoofable. So in addition to these standards, and this is the piece we're talking about around creating some more rigor and security on top of this transparency, is we need to authenticate these things so that not only do you receive, let's say as an exchange or as a buyer, you receive a signal that tells you this is the device, this is the app, this is who the seller is, but you're actually able to authenticate yourself. So yes, I've verified, I've validated that that is the device that it claims to be, the app that it claims to be, and the seller that it claims to be. And so this is a little bit more forward-looking. I'll point to the work that we're doing around a new proposed standard called Ads.cert 2.0. And so the idea behind Ads.cert is it's a proposal using cryptographic math to authenticate these messages. So bid requests, billing notifications, like Ben was referring to earlier, so that you don't have to trust the message you receive on face value. So if someone is spoofing, for example, an SSAI and sending you a falsified event notification, if that comes with an Ads.cert cryptographic signature with it, what you can do as the recipient of that message is you can actually authenticate it and say, yes, this was Publica that sent me this particular event notification, this billing notification, and not some fraudster claiming to be Publica. So it's a super, I think, important mechanism to allow us to actually authenticate the claims that people make in our marketplaces, rather than just have to believe them at face value. So I think that this proposal, and hopefully it gets ratified as a standard, will serve as the basis for securing information about seller, about the app, about the device, and eventually even the user themselves. And it'll protect all these things from tampering by malicious middlemen or malicious fraudsters.
Right.
So I'll pause for a second, because I know I've thrown out a whole bunch of different solutions, some existing, some new, but that I think is the space that we're working in to try to secure the supply chain here.
Yeah, the one thing that I'll add to what he just said, Rob, is at least from the Tech Lab point of view, the main thing that we're trying to do is focus on transparency, which does not solve everything, of course, but that basically attempts to kind of reduce the opportunity for fraud, right? So basically, if you think about Ads.txt, sellers.json, all those things, basically let you kind of figure out who you are working with. And then, of course, Ads.cert is also doing the same kind of thing from an authentication point of view, and basically try to eliminate the opportunities for fraud. And that's one of the reasons why the first thing that we focused on from an Ads.cert point of view is the billing notifications, right? So if there is no opportunity to make money because you are verifying who the signals are coming from, then it reduces the chances of interest for fraud.
That's exactly it. We can't ever eliminate the fraud per se. What we can do is make it harder and harder, and sort of more infeasible for folks to perpetuate it, and that's the goal.
And Rob, I think you gave a really good overview of there is a gold mine of information today available, and I know that it might be a bit difficult for some publishers, and particularly in our industry, but many different people, to understand why are we even talking about this, right? This is very technical, but it is so important that sellers and buyers try to dive into this a little bit to understand what information is actually being used in this transaction, and can I trust it? I'd give a parallel of, think of an art auction, because really this entire system is an auction, right? With sellers on one side and buyers on one side. If you're a seller and you're selling a painting, wouldn't you want to at least have seen what your painting looks like before you sell it, right? So that's why you have to be interested in what signals am I putting out there, because that's what people are going to be bidding on, right? Is, are you passing that header correctly? Are you passing the content info? I mean, the OpenRTB spec is as an Adtech geek, I find it beautiful. It's a beautiful spec that has a ton of information in it. So first, you have to be interested in, what am I putting out there? What are people actually buying on? And then, if you're selling a Picasso, wouldn't you want that Picasso to be authenticated, right? To be certified by some other entity. It's not just you saying, hey, this is a Picasso. It's somebody else coming in and saying, yeah, I know the origin of this painting. You're going to get a much higher price for it, right? So it's the same thing. It's just happening billions of times per day, right? But it's so crucial that all parties understand that we need to be not only passing the right information, but then also certifying that information is correct.
Right. And one final point I'll make before we move away from Ads.cert is that I know that Ads.cert has been out on our GitHub and has been in beta for a reason. Is not really changed, but what we are doing right now with Ads.cert is kind of re-architecting it in a pretty major manner, I should say. We are trying to, first of all, decoupling it from OpenRTB 3.0 because we are looking at the reality of, okay, the adoption of 3.0 is probably going to take a little more time. And secondly, we're trying to make it a little more easy to implement by following some of the common cryptographic standards that are used by the security industry in general, and building up implementation guides for specific use cases so that it's easier for people to implement. So that is a major piece of work that's going on right now. So definitely want to actually also invite people who are interested in the topic to join that working group and contribute, because we are right in the middle of getting that thing done. But moving on from that, I know that there are other efforts going on as well. Actually, Janelle, maybe can talk about open measurement for CTV and what's going on over there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are very supportive of the efforts of the Open Measurement SDK, which is looking to build out CTV OM SDK. And with OM SDK measurement for CTV, this gets us back to the gold standard of measurement, where the measurement will happen directly from the device again. And when measurement comes directly from the device, it's definitely much more difficult for fraudsters to spoof that. So that is a very big piece that we are excited and actively contributing and in the working group there as well. One other thing I did want to note was just, again, Mode Analytics definitely supports all of the standards, but I do think it's important that the solutions alone won't solve IVT. So we look at it as when you layer these additional solutions with the QA and fraud detection that a measurement vendor like Moat provides, it becomes easier to identify and stop fraud quicker. And that's our ultimate goal here.
That makes sense. And I know that there are some other so I should, to reiterate what you just said, Janelle, I do think it's important to keep in mind that it's not just about standards. There are going to be other technologies that are important in terms of fraud detection that everyone should definitely be looking at as well. But going back, I probably want to spend a minute more, a couple of minutes more on standards again. I know that there is one of the things that I did want to emphasize is that there is a lot of work going on in OpenRTB in relation to CTV work efforts right now. The things that Rob mentioned about the App Store ID is actually an important one, partly because it's important to know where your inventory is coming from. But the other part of it is really try to make it easy for data to be communicated and so that you can follow through on the other things, right? So the App Store ID translates to, is important to translate to the Ads.cert details, right? So it's only if you have that information in the OpenRTB request that you can actually track it down to the level of detail that you really want to. So getting that OpenRTB data clean is an important piece that we're working on.
Yeah, to Janelle's point, right? These things all need to be layered, right? And so any of these individual solutions on their own won't really protect the supply chain, won't really protect buyers and sellers. As you start to layer them, you create the authenticity of the messages, you create more transparency into who's the buyer, who's the seller, and as a result, you actually generate more reliable data that you can use, again, in the position of, for example, an ad verification vendor to identify anomalies and see anything that looks, weird, right? And so, yeah, all of these things have to go together. The other thing too is we have to, I think, be pretty careful about what the limitations of these approaches are, so that we create true security and not just security theater, right? And so there are some there's some ways that actually, you could look at inventory that comes, it's authenticated, the bid request is signed, et cetera, that gives an air of credibility to a request that is actually still fraudulent, right? And so maybe we take a moment to talk about that too.
Absolutely. And actually, that's probably a good segue to the next thing that I was going to ask, which is, what are the remaining challenges? We have already done all this work, right? So what's left to do?
Yeah, I could start off on this one. I think, Ads.cert 2.0 is a very important milestone in the evolution of CTV, because it is going to be the first time that we implement a way for servers to talk to one another in a secure way, right? So that's incredibly important. But I mean, Rob just nailed it on the head. If you secure a transaction, but the underlying content is false or fake, right? Then you actually maybe made it even worse. So I think, now that and I shouldn't say now, because we still have to get this thing out and adopted, right? So there's still a few things that we need to do, but I think after that, looking at, to me, there's two. The SSAI spoofing is number one, which is why we had to start with this. But I think it's device spoofing. So fraudsters impersonating a CTV from the web. You could do that using a trusted SSAI server, right? So we're going to have to figure that one out. And then the content spoofing is another big one. So you could be a low tier app on any CTV and pretend to be one of the top publishers in the space, right? So those are important things. And then I would say maybe a bit outside of that, also just piracy of streams, right? I think there's still a lot of pirated content out there on the internet. So there's going to be, if we want the streaming world to take off and, all these great services that are coming out, you can't be finding pirated content anywhere. So I think that's going to be a next level of security that we'll need to implement.
I'll bite next. So the model I kind of have on this one is I have a diagram in my head where I have buyers, marketers and advertisers on the right, and I have end users with their eyeballs on the left. And the way I see it is that we're starting with security approaches here on the right and working our way towards the left, right? So we can start with, let's say, securing communications between SSAI vendors and exchanges, SSPs, et cetera. But exactly as Ben said, we need to keep on pushing further left in that diagram, right? Because the more we push fraudsters to the left, the harder it becomes for them to do their job. So, for example, it's easier to impersonate an SSAI than it is to impersonate, to create activity that looks like a real human, right? So the more we can push fraudsters to have to operate on the margins on the left-hand side of the diagram, the harder it becomes, the more infeasible it becomes. So yes, I think the limitation is exactly the one Ben pointed to. Is if you have a bad piece of content, it's making requests to an SSAI that now uses a secure channel to talk to the exchange. Like, great, what did that really buy you, right? So we have to continue pushing by making SSAI spoofing difficult. We're just going to push fraudsters further to the left, and so we also have to keep going further to the left. So it's a continuous battle that we're going to have until at some point you make it infeasible enough that, all right, the fraudsters move somewhere else because it's just not economically advantageous anymore to try to operate in this space. That's where we want to get to.
Yeah, and ultimately, as an advertiser, you should be able to independently measure your CTV investments. So the more we make CTV data more actionable for advertisers and publishers themselves, the better. So some best practices we recommend is passing seller IDs to your measurement vendors so that when we catch invalid traffic, you're then very easily able to identify the exact source. Also, looking at CTV device categorization. So understanding that your inventory ran on Apple TV or Roku, it brings another layer of transparency. It also enables teams to really start to analyze and look at the distribution of devices that they're seeing on their campaigns. One of the things with StreamScam was that impressions were coming from a very limited number of devices early on. And that was a red flag for us that enabled us to identify this behavior as suspicious.
Those are all excellent points, and I'd like to mirror what Rob said for a second. We keep hearing about how fraudsters are keeping on. It's a game of attrition, as people talk about, right? That they keep coming up with new things that you got to keep fighting. But I think the mirror of that is also true. The more difficult we make it for them, the more effort that they got to put in to perpetuate fraud as well. So and we have to keep doing that, keep pushing them to the left, as Rob said. I guess like to end with the final comments about, let's have a call to action. What would each of you like to see from sellers and buyers?
I'll take a first crack at this one. I think the call to action is relatively straightforward, as much as the technology seems maybe somewhat sophisticated, right? Which is to participate in the process of setting these standards so that your voice is heard, and then adopt them so that we can secure the supply chain and that this entire marketplace can mature and be protected from being implicated in fraud schemes where you're sort of an innocent bystander, right? And that applies, I think to publishers just as much as it does to buyers. If someone, if a buyer sees fraud that seems to be perpetuated on a particular app or a particular domain, they'll just block it, and the good stuff gets thrown out with the bad, right? So that's a big risk to sellers. The more sort of high quality premium of a seller you are, the more you're going to be targeted by the fraudsters, and you don't want to be wrapped up in the dragnet, right, when they try to take the fraud down. So that's an important aspect for sellers, and then buyers. I think that the call to action for them is, again, very simple. Demand these protections for the supply that you buy on, so that you can have assurances that your money is well spent. So I want to know that the supply is authentic, that the billable events that are coming to me are authentic, so that I'm not wasting my money. I think that should be sort of the approach for buyers. So that would be my call to action.
Yeah, echoing on that, I think we have to force the conversation to really get the adoption out there. So asking your partners where they are with the adoption of Ads.txt, or asking them what their awareness level is of Ads.cert 2.0 to start those conversations and to make sure that it's understood that there is demand for implementing these standards.
Yeah, those are the call to actions. I don't want to muddy the water. I think it's just about being demanding is the main word, right? Especially as an advertiser, if you own your budgets, right? You're the ones making the decision. So that's the way things are going to get adopted.
Actually, that's a very important point as well, Ben. I think it is important for buyers to remember that they have the power to push everybody in the right direction, and definitely should use that. From a Tech Lab point of view, I think my call to actions are obvious and straightforward. Number one, I'd love to see adoption of the specs. The CTV updates to Ads.txt were released recently, and we need adoption of that, both from a device platform point of view, which the major platforms already have been doing, but still need more to happen there. And then the second thing is, of course, just publishers and everyone else start to implement their app ads.txt for CTV platforms on a more regular basis. And then the second thing, obviously, is ask people to join our working group. I think there's a lot of work going on that we'd love to get everyone's participation from. I think that's all we have for today. Thank you so much, everyone. You've been a great panel.
Amit, I think we've got a question.
Oh, we do.
If you want, I'll just read it out since I think it's probably directed towards me. What is the role of SSPs to keep out fraud? They're the ones who are sending money to valid and invalid players. How hard is it to determine the authenticity of who you're sending money to? I think it's a really great question. Today, it's quite difficult to determine the authenticity because we sort of have these bid requests that come in and billing notifications that come in JSON objects or HTTP requests that we sort of have to take at face value. We have a number of measures that we use to try to ferret out bad actors, but they're very imprecise today. So we have, industry standard IP blacklists, and we have, various analyses of user agents and stuff that we try to use to ferret out the bad behavior, but they're relatively imprecise. Whereas a cryptographic signature is the opposite. It's extremely precise, right? So if we have adoption of these standards, it'll be very straightforward for us to determine the authenticity. And then it becomes a question of, each SSP or exchange does its due diligence to decide which partners are reputable and who do you want to work with. So for example, we're thrilled to work with Publica when we see, impression notifications that have their certificate on it. Great, that's awesome. If we see something that claims to be Publica that doesn't have their signature on it, we know it's garbage. So hopefully it becomes easier to do that. And that's sort of the whole point, is that we'll get better at routing money to the legitimate content producers that we all want to support in this industry and away from the fraudsters.
Right. Right. And if it seems like we all of us are harping on Ads.cert, there is a reason that we are doing so. It is probably the key to moving this conversation to the next level, right? So once you know for sure who you're talking to, you can. And that doesn't solve everything. Obviously, you still need to be sure that you trust the people that are communicating with you. But at least it moves that conversation to that other part. Are there any other questions that you see, Rob? Or
that was the only one that I saw.
All right, great. All right, well, I think that is a great conversation. Thank you so much for Index Exchange for hosting us, and you all have been a great set of speakers. Thank you.
Thanks for moderating, Amit.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody.